The first time I heard it, I thought the hallway pipes were settling. A small metal tap at the door, then the soft recoil of the cylinder. Not a knock, not footsteps. A click, like a promise keeping time with my pulse. The spare key in the door clicks every night. That is how the thought arrived, complete and unwanted, as if my brain had lived here longer than I had. I lay on the rug with a cup of mint tea cooling in my hands and counted my breaths. I heard no voices from the neighbors, no elevator bell, only the slow breathing of the building and that tiny, exact sound. I moved closer until my cheek felt the grain of the painted wood. The door smelled faintly of old varnish and cold air. The peephole gave back nothing but a circle of hallway dark. I willed the light to trip on, but it stayed asleep because the motion sensor needs motion. No one moved. Still, metal whispered against metal, and the knob twitched under my fingers. I held it and felt the trembling pass through. It did not feel like wind or settling. It felt like intention. I pressed my phone flat on the floor and recorded. The microphone can hear what skin and bone misread, I told myself. Later, at the table, I played it back. The room offered the low hush of the refrigerator, the clink of ceramic as I set the cup down. Then came the click. Exact, clean, close. I thought about the spare key I'd given to my ex before the last winter when I still believed in sharing problems the way we split groceries. I remembered taking it back. I remembered his face in the taxi glass, thinner than mine, too awake for midnight. I remembered, but memory is a picture, not a lock. The recording ended with my own breath catching. I stared at the door and asked the simplest question the room could hold. If the key was inside my drawer, what was touching the lock now? The hallway stayed dark, and the knob cooled under my palm. By the next evening, I had a box on the counter and an instruction sheet under my elbow. I installed the smart lock because I wanted more than a story. I wanted logs and timestamps and green lights and red warnings. The screwdriver bit the soft screws. My hands smelled like coin metal. When I tightened the last plate, the lock hummed and the voice from the app said the word secured in a neutral, friendly tone. I made tea again. I set the phone screen to the lock dashboard and watched a circle glow steady. The minutes thinned into the small hours. I felt the shape of the night change, like the room leaning forward to listen with me. The click arrived as if I had ordered it. Not a second before, not a second after. A clean touch to the cylinder, then a second, answering touch as if the first had asked a question and the second said yes. The app showed no unlock event, no failed code, no tamper warning. The circle held steady, confident that nothing had tried to cross. But the knob under my right hand trembled enough to make my rings chatter. I eased my eye to the peephole. Darkness stayed stubborn. The motion light would not wake without motion, and apparently whoever stood there knew that. I swallowed and tested the chain. It was latched. The gap between door and frame let a blade of hallway air slide against my wrist. It felt cool and dry, as if a fan were aimed from a distance. I said his name once, quiet enough to be deniable. Nothing answered. Not a word, not a breath, only the small insistence of metal speaking in code. When the sound finally stopped, the lock beeped once, a meaningless notification tied to nothing. In the morning, I checked the drawer. The spare key lay in its dish, a red plastic tag hanging from its ring where I'd written my unit number in marker. I turned it in my hand and smelled the faint sweetness of permanent ink. I set it back in the dish and felt the circle inside the app like a useless, perfect sun. Rule 1 did not have its name yet, but it had a habit: it never knocked. On the third night, I set my phone in the hallway inside the door, screen down, microphone out. I told myself that if the recording caught nothing, I would sleep. I told myself many things I didn't believe. I sat with my back to the door and drank water so cold it ached behind my eyes. When the click arrived, the recording caught it. It also caught a thin thread of sound I missed in the moment. In the morning, with the city already awake and the hallway full of casual light, I played the file at the table. The click came. And then, faintly, as if a distance away and half swallowed by cotton, my own voice said his old nickname. It was not live. It was a recording of a recording, the artifact of a cheap voice memo, the hiss riding on my syllables like static from long ago. I scrubbed back and listened again. It was my tone from a happier problem. I knew because I heard the smile I used to wear without thinking. The word tumbled across the speaker and died. I inferred that someone outside had played it because I never called him that anymore, and because the sound came from the same side as the hallway. The door wood carried it like a drumhead. The thought of a phone held up to my door, cycling through pieces of my past, made me pace the living room until the rug buckled. I checked the lock logs again. At the time of the voice, there was nothing. The building's camera down by the elevator was down for maintenance, according to a paper taped under the lens in careful handwriting. The motion light above my door still behaved like a well-trained animal. I waved at it until it woke just to watch it go dark again. The tea tasted like mint and tin. I went to the drawer and took out the spare key with the red tag. I pressed the tag to my wrist to feel the edge. I tried to remember the last time he'd touched my door. I could not, and the memory rolled like dice under a table. I set the key back, still there, still my dish, and counted the new mystery aloud if he did not speak. Why was my voice what I heard? When the evening returned, the hallway light flickered once as if considering, then refused. The building manager brought up a notice about maintenance and apologized with his eyes cast at my floor. He promised the camera would be back in a week. His breath carried the clean sting of mouthwash and coffee. I asked if anyone had a master key. He told me only he did, which is the same as telling me several people did. I did not fight him. I bought a bag of flour at the corner store and kept my plan quiet. That night, with my hands shaking so badly I had to steady them on the wall, I dusted the thin welcome mat outside my door. I made a joke to myself about bread. I closed the door and watched through the peephole as the flyover settled like a tiny weather system. I waited for the light to sleep. The click arrived. The lock did not acknowledge. The chain vibrated without moving. I bent to look through the peephole again and saw a darker dark perched at the edge of the light's radius. The shape did not step close enough to wake it. I did not see a face or a hand, but the flyover recorded time instead of sight. In the morning, when I opened the door, the pattern was plain: two ovals, side by side, toes toward me, heels planted. They were not imprints of vigorous movement. They were the prints of someone who stood still for a long while. The edges stayed crisp as if the body above them had turned into a statue. I photographed them and sealed the picture into the same album where my plants live. I cleaned the flyover with a damp cloth, and it bled into a paste that stuck under my fingernails. The welcome mat felt gritty when I straightened it. The smell of wet flyover clung to the door threshold like old milk until evening. I ordered a peephole cover and pressed it in place. The thought that someone could see me seeing them made my spine itch. Rule 1 lifted its head and looked at me squarely. Whoever this was would not knock. They would touch the keyhole and wait. The logs agreed. The circle in the app glowed its blank approval, a record of nothing while my door kept a record of everything. When I went to sleep in the afternoon, I dreamed the prints moved closer 1 grain at a time and wondered what weight patience weighs. I bought a small thermal camera that clipped to my phone because I wanted heat instead of light. Light had obeyed the intruder, heat might prefer me. I read reviews that said it could see mice in walls and broken seals around windows. That seemed honest. I set it up and learned its palette until the colors meant something. The first night I tried it, I turned every lamp off and sat against the opposite wall like a sentry. The screen painted my room blue and black. My body glowed orange. The door was a plate of green. Minutes stretched. The click came. The smart lock breathed in silence. I lifted the thermal image to the peephole and the screen flared. On the far side of the door, framed by the colder void of the hall, a shape was heat and patience. Shoulders sloped, head bowed a little. He wore a hood or his hair shadowed him in a way I recognized from other winters. Distinct was not the word, but familiar is crueler. He did not move into the motion light. He stood at the edge of its territory, testing the lock with a key that did not belong. Each small push of metal warmed the cylinder enough to blush the screen. The breath on the door was intermittent, as if he held it to become part of the wall. I felt a pressure in my chest that could have been fear or recognition. When the figure shifted, something in his pocket glowed brighter and brief. A phone, maybe, or metal warmed by the palm. The temperature lines around the keyhole brightened. The handle took on the ghost of his fingers. Then the quiet returned. I saved stills and stared at them until the colors turned back into shapes I could name. The app offered me nothing. The building manager offered me apologies. I offered myself a deal. I would not drink tonight. I had cut corners before. But corners mean something when you live at the end of a dark hall. Rule 2 had not been named either, not yet. But it drew itself. He never came when the light was awake. Only when the hallway fell asleep, he stood guard in the warm shape of a man I had loved until I couldn't. In the morning light, the grain of the wood showed faint, fresh crescents around the lock face, like nails in paint. I wrote a note and taped it to the outside of my door while the motion light watched me. Please stop. I will call the police. My handwriting looked smaller than I meant it to. I took a photo. I went inside and waited to hear the paper pulled free, the sound of torn tape. The note remained. At midnight, the smart speaker in the kitchen said it was time to sleep. I had told it to do that months ago, a ritual that made the walls feel friendly. I disarmed the habit and set my phone to silent. When the click came, the speaker stayed quiet. But I heard speech anyway, thin, muffled, wider than the door, as if played from a chest pocket. The words were mine. They were the messages I had left him in the old year, apologies and invites and jokes that were not jokes. I had deleted them. I had thought that meant anything. I pressed my ear to the wood and made out one phrase clearly, a line I hated myself for remembering. Wait outside. I need to know you're there. I had said it once when I was afraid of my own temper and wanted him as proof of constancy. I had said it with a smile I could hear, a reckless tone I once wore like costume jewelry. The voice on the other side did not change, did not add to it, did not answer. The words ended where my old recording ended. I inferred he was playing my voice back to himself the way some people touch the scar that made them superstitious. He was building shape out of old noise. The idea moved around the room until it found a seat, then it would not move again. I called the police that night. An officer listened to me breathe and asked if the person had tried the door. I told her about the clicks and the flyover and the thermal picture that looked like a heat-stained prayer. She promised a drive-by. The drive-by did not arrive. I understand time. I do not forgive it. Before dawn, the note outside tore neatly in half. The upper half stayed, the tape still pressed to the metal. The lower half was gone. The rip was straight, like a page pulled along a ruler. My phone showed no unlock, no tamper, not even a low battery sigh. The line I once said came back to me as if it had been waiting in the vents. I need to know you're there. I asked my neighbor across the hall to stand in the stairwell that faces the opposite angle. She is older than me and has the posture of a violin case. She said yes, because she has lived in more buildings than this one. We set it up so that when the hallway light turned off, she would watch the corner that the camera could not see, and I would watch the peephole with the thermal screen ready. I called the non-emergency line and told them I believed the person would come after the light fell asleep. I asked if an officer could park outside with visual on the glass door. They said they would try. I have learned what that means. At the appointed hour, darkness arranged itself. The click came almost kindly. The thermal screen flared with the shape I knew. My neighbor texted that she saw a hooded figure standing 2 doorways down, just out of the motion sensor's radius, turning something metal in a hand. She sent a single word that told me more than any paragraph: waiting. The figure did not step into the light. The police did not arrive in time to see him. When the stairwell door sighed, the warm shape slid to the blind spot. My neighbor lost him. I saw nothing through the peephole except lighter dark where the motion light would begin if it were allowed. I waited with a hand on the chain until my fingers hurt. After the sound ceased and the air flattened, I opened the door. On the handle hung a small sticker, a cheap child's prize in the shape of a smiling key. It grinned with the same straight black line I used to draw as a kid. I stared until my eyes watered. The sticker peeled away under my thumbnail in a slow curl. My skin carried the smell of cheap glue for hours. Rule 2 stood up on its hind legs and told me the truth. He came only when the light was off, only where cameras do not look, only into the attention gap I made by covering the peephole. The law called and apologized for missing him. My neighbor patted my shoulder twice and held it once. It mattered. And still I slept badly, because if he had keys, then the sticker was not decoration. It was a small, laughing map. I finally reached the clinic where he had checked himself several months ago, a place that treats sleep disorders by rewiring habits. They could not tell me much. They confirmed a detail that made even my teeth ache. He had relapsed after discharge. Sleepwalking had bloomed alongside the relapse. I asked how they knew. The counselor spoke carefully about reports of late-night wandering of patients who returned to familiar doors like geese to a lake. She did not say his name. She did not have to. The double twist arrived without drama. The first was this: he stood guard not to break in but to keep something out, the version of me who had told him to wait. He was living inside the command I had spoken once into the night, recycling it from his phone the way people replay favorite songs, only this was not a song. This was a chain. If the recording ended, he left. If it played, he stood. He never said his own words at my door. He did not need any. The second was uglier. The building manager had given him a copy of a copy months before, when I still thought help looked like sharing keys for package deliveries. The manager had shrugged and said it was standard. People lose things. I asked him to his face. He lowered his eyes and said it was a misunderstanding. I held up the sticker from my drawer and asked if misunderstandings by children's prizes. He said he liked to keep tenants happy. Some tenants came with shadows longer than others. I contacted a lawyer. The lawyer asked about recordings, about dates, about the smart lock logs that said nothing happened each time something did. She told me a judge would care about proof of an attempt, not an intuition. I said the proof lived in heat pictures and torn paper and flyover prints and a stupid smiling sticker. She said that could be enough if we were lucky and if the building cooperated. That night I did not cover the peephole. I let the eyes stay open and stared into the hall until it stared back. When the light fell asleep, the thermal screen painted him there, outside the circle, my red-tagged spare key untouched in its dish. He played my voice again. He stood as if guarding a grave from graver thieves. The chain vibrated once, sympathetic to an intent the lock would never name. I whispered 2 words into the old wood, not invited. We set it up with care because I needed the pattern to break in the only way that counted. The detective, who finally took pity on my stack of proof, told me why they could use a no-knock warrant if the judge agreed. Immediate danger, documented stalking, evidence of keys that could give access before officers could announce. We would need an entry to show intent that crossed from ritual to trespass. We would also need to act before dawn while his rules were awake. I recorded a phrase he knew. I set it to play at the small hour when his shadow usually arrived. My neighbor sat in the stairwell again. 2 officers waited at the bottom of the stairwell door, one with eyes on the glass entrance, one with eyes on the blind corner. The building manager had been summoned and could not find an angle for his eyes to slide out through. I stood inside with the chain off and the deadbolt engaged. The recording played on a loop from the speaker beside the door. My own voice said, calm and rash, "Come in. Please, I need you here." The words felt like rotten fruit in my mouth even as the speaker made them clean. My skin prickled because I was using my voice to set a trap, because I was putting teeth in the pattern. The click came exact, then a second, slow sound as the physical key pressed into a lock that was not his to touch. The smart lock registered nothing because the deadbolt held. The handle turned. The room shifted as if the door was inhaling. I put my palm flat against the wood and felt heat return from the other side. On the third press, the cylinder turned enough to catch, and the door opened a finger's width against the deadbolt. It stopped as if ashamed. The chain was not there to save me, my hand was. He had crossed his own rule by obeying mine. I had only needed to say the words. The officers moved faster than I thought they could. The no-knock warrant arrived the way paper always does, with signatures and a stamp that made it real enough to enter an apartment on the floor below, where he had been sleeping in clothes that looked like a life he had borrowed from a colder place. They found the ring of copied keys, including one tagged with my unit number in red plastic. They found the phone with my voice queued up like prayer beads, the old recordings labeled with dates that he had no right to remember that way. The building changed all the locks by evening. The new keys came in small envelopes that smelled like paper and metal dust. I packed my life into boxes gently and took slow photographs of rooms that had kept me and failed me in equal measure. I moved out. I went into rehab because fear had been the drink I poured for myself and the one he offered me by standing, and I could not tell the difference anymore. On my last walk down the hallway, the motion light woke obediently. The door closed behind me with a dull, clean sound. My hand shook once, then went still. I looked at the new lock face, unmarred, and thought about how patience wears grooves you can only see when the light hits just so. The elevator doors slid open, and the box in my arms felt less like a burden. I did not look back. I did not need to know if anyone was there.